After we took Pyongyang, the capital of North Korea, we moved north to the area of Unsan. We set up our mortars in a large dry ditch. Behind us was a cornfield of corn shocks. Beyond that, there were a few Korean farmhouses. We checked it out, and they appeared friendly. They laughed and made hand signs with us trying to converse. One of them was acting like a big sport and wanted to arm wrestle. We left 2 steel helmets for them to fill with food, and we went back to our mortars. When the food was ready, they brought it to us. One was rice, the other vegetable soup. As we settled down that evening, the quartermaster issued our winter clothes. They were standard-down sleeping bags and warm clothing. We didn't get into them right away. It was around 9 p.m. and some of us were going to sleep and just hanging out. Then we heard a bugle horn. It came from the 12 o'clock position. Then, methodologically, deliberately, the second bugle blew counterclockwise to 11 o'clock. Then in succession, 10 o'clock. And so on, the sound from the bugles indexed around back to the 12 o'clock position. The bugles came from our outer perimeter, and it was freaking the heck out of us. We didn't know what the hell was going on. Then silence. Nothing, not a word, not a sound. It was eerie. It was unnerving. Then zing! It was time for troopers to die. Solid tracers lit up the sky from the enemy. It appeared that we were caught in the middle of hell. We never heard anything like this in our life. We didn't get a command from our forward observer, so we thought he was killed. Troopers were getting shot in the stomach. Troopers were getting shot everywhere. I remember this 17-year-old boy that was shot in the stomach and cried for his mother, "Mama, Mama!" We quickly used up our mortar rounds. We were not prepared since we thought we were going back to Japan. Then, to our astonishment, the friendly people that sold food to us opened fire from behind. We were trapped. Lieutenant Pedoni said, "Every man for himself. Get the hell out of here." We were being annihilated. 2 of us ran for the ditch. The GI with me jumped too high and hit the ditch dead. There was a Persian tank to the left, about 400 feet. I jumped to the back of the tank, but the bullets were dinging, bouncing and ricocheting off the metal and zinging around. I quickly left the tank. I don't know why I didn't get hit. The enemy rapidly fired their small weapons at the tank, and I was in the middle of it. I had to scramble and fast. Then I crawled down on my belly and made it outside the perimeter because the Chinese were closing in and shooting the rest of anything that moved. As the shooting died down, I heard their laughter through the slaughter of my comrades' screams as they were bayoneted. I suppose they were mopping up the wounded. I made tracks as far away as I could and blanked out as I fled. I don't know how I spent the night. I woke up and walked to the edge of the woods on the side of the hill. I looked down, and there were these houses in a row. There were jeeps, tanks, and equipment lined up for 1,000 feet, lined up bumper to bumper. I noticed beef hanging in a shed. There were piles and piles of sea rations. I crept up to what looked like the main command post, CP headquarters, and there was no one around, not one soul. I was starving. I hadn't eaten for a long time. I filled my pockets with sea rations with the intent of returning back to the front lines. Something felt wrong. I looked up and I saw the brush moving. It was soldiers about 200 feet away running toward me with brush all over their helmets. They didn't fire, and they could have. It must have been a sneak attack, and they didn't want to wake anyone. I ran for the hills. When I looked back, the Chinese were invading the shacks, but no one was there. Had they known I was the only one there, I would have been dead right now, for sure. I went further up the hill. I ran into a bare patch surrounded by pines. It was a graveyard where they bury their dead. That is where I was watching what they were doing. And this helicopter seen me and came 50 feet from my position and then darted away. I'm thinking, what the hell did he leave me for? What spooked him? I took cover in the grass-covered mounds heaped over the dead until dusk. At that time, the enemy moved out the jeeps and trucks they had seized because the planes discontinued their daily patrols. Now was a good time to split, since they were preoccupied with moving the equipment. I ran into a slow trot to a big river with big sandbars on the sides. I wrote a big SOS in the sand, and I saw footprints. Not like the shoes Koreans wear, but like the Americans wear. I thought they were GIS, so I hurried to catch up with them. Then I saw a big hole on the other side of the river, back into the riverbank. Also, there was an abandoned, half-buried tank where I crossed the river. I crossed the river where there was this big arch hole, and when I looked in it, it looked like a great enormous room in there. They were refugees, old men, women, and children. All eyes were looking at me. So I thought I'd better get my ass out of there. So I traveled down the river. I met 6 guys. One of them was talking to himself all the time. He was out of it. So anyway, I traveled with them about a mile further. We saw part of a barn that stuck out from the bend ahead. When I came around the bend, we saw a house up against the hill. There was an old man feeding his ox. He was extremely nervous, very nervous. I ran up and opened the door at the house, and Chinese were lying all over the floors. I looked up and saw out in the ravine more Chinese. They were all lined up sleeping along the banks. I didn't have much ammo for my .45 and thought I'd better get my ass out of there before one of them realized he wasn't looking at another Chinese. As I got away, I heard gunfire behind me. The guys I was with started shooting them while they were asleep in the room. I heard more fire exchanged. I knew they were dead by now because I heard no more shots. I was making tracks in record time. I climbed the ridge and followed the river. I was so hungry because I'd had thrown the sea rations and other valuables away, my gold-trimmed Parker pen and pencil set along with my watch, earlier in the game because they were slowing me down. After I got to the top of the ridge, I saw a trail about 3 feet wide that went down the center of the ridge. I was so damn hungry. My stomach was growling and growling. I kept my pace at a trot. I saw a green patch close to the riverbank that looked like a garden. I told myself, I gotta go down and see if I can get something to eat. They looked like long white radish, about 10 inches long. I took a bite. They tasted like a turnip. I got 3 or 4 of those in my pocket and climbed back on the ridge. I was in my trot again, thinking, go west, young man, go west. There were a few pine trees on both sides of the trail. I was in a fast trot nearing the trees when a pheasant jumped up out of the brush and scared the hell out of me. He took off flying. Man, did he scare the heck out of me. I needed to clean my shorts. It was getting dark. It looked like it was going to rain. The sky was cloudy with sheet lightning. It would flash in the heavens and flicker. But the trail glowed because there was foliage on both sides of the path. I was traveling at a fast trot, one I can run for miles and move a pretty good lick. I was anxious to get back to American troops. I thought I heard something, so I stopped. I didn't see anything or hear anything else. So I started my trot again. Again, I thought I heard something. So I stopped and listened. Nothing. Silence. All quiet. I started my fast-paced trot again, and then the lightning flashed, and I saw them all. I was on top of the Chinese patrol. Had I took another step, I would have landed on his leg. I almost landed on his back. I froze in step. I was scared so bad, I gave them time to get down the trail so they wouldn't hear me. Then I went over the side, down to the river again. I crossed the shallow part of the river. My clothes were all wet. I was so exhausted. I saw a farmhouse, a few little buildings, and some sheds. I saw a pit where they were throwing in these reddish turnips. They threw these turnips into a long, narrow pit, about 5 to 6 feet wide. It appeared they were harvesting. I knocked on the door. I was scared to death, but I was so tired and hungry that I didn't care. They let me come into their house. They had a hibachi in the middle of the floor. It was nice and warm. It was a man and a woman with a teenage daughter. She brought me a Post magazine and showed me a picture of new cars. She was pointing at the car and pointing at me. I was showing her in hand gestures that when I got home, I was going to buy a new car. I was flicking one hand over the other as if I was counting money, and they gave me the thumps up and smiles. They thought that was neat. Her mother took off my boots. I was so tired that I overcame the fright. They took off my socks to dry. They brought me a bowl of rice and a bowl kind of like a broth. It was too hot, so they took some peppers out of the bowl. I became so sleepy, sleepy. I didn't mean to fall asleep, and I woke up hours later. My clothes were all dry. I couldn't believe that after I opened my eyes, I was still alive. I thought, what a nice family this is. I tried to give them some money I had in my wallet, but they wouldn't take it. They took a finger and made a motion across their throat, meaning they would get their throat slit if evidence was found they were harboring me. They went outside with me and pointed their finger in which direction to go. Now, I'm back up on the trail again, going the direction they told me to go, same as before. After trotting for a couple of hours, I looked down and I saw houses, and there was a creek dividing them. It good-sized, dry creek bed. There were Chinese surrounding a big pot of food. They each had a little bowl, pushing the rice in their mouths with chopsticks. I thought I could reach up and grab one of them by his pants and pull him over the bank. I was that close to them. I made it through and passed through the Chinese in broad daylight. I was proud of me. So I got past the Chinese. I started up my fast trot again. I was homesick. I wanted to see the 8th Cavalry so bad 'cause I can't whip all those Chinese by myself. I kept thinking what a blunder General MacArthur had made. Any fool could have figured that out. A lot of guys lost their lives over that. What a stupid thing to do. We wouldn't have allowed Chinese that close to our border. It was pissing me off. I didn't want to think too much about this. The next day, I'm going like hell down the trail again. Go west, young man, go west. That is what I kept saying to myself. It kept my rhythm going. Then I came upon a few more small houses down the hill. The little pine trees were thick. I was taller than many of them. I crept as close as I could to see if I could get through the Chinese. Suddenly, I heard a noise behind me. Yeah! I looked over my shoulder, and there was a Chink with a Sub-Thompson machine gun on me, the kind Al Capone and the Chicago gangsters used. Up to this point, we were told to shoot ourselves because the Koreans would wire our hands behind our backs and torture us, and then execute us with a bullet in the back of our heads. But they didn't seem like gooks to me. I knew they could have sawed me in half in a split second, so I decided to raise my hands and take a chance on living, Down below, the Chinese were eating, and so this guard that had me a gunpoint shouted below. They all rushed up the hill to see me. They took me down the hill. They took my .45. They were playing with it, and I thought they'd going to shoot themselves. Caution was out the window. They were shouting and relying they had a prisoner. They had never seen a Caucasian before, only Chinese. All these Chinese were coming up to take a good look at me. They gave me a small bowl of rice and another bowl of something else. I took a bite, and it was frickin' hot. They took out the peppers and burst out laughing. One Chinese came up to me and said, "Who, how, and when?" I would repeat the words, and they would all start laughing. It was like I was their pet dog or something. I was relieved by now that I wasn't tortured and executed. They had a mule skinner there. These guys moved their country supplies in massive two-wheeled carts. A big horse was in front of the cart to carry the weight, and the skinny and agile mules were up ahead. These guys would snap their whips to the side of the mules to manipulate their movements. They were whipped trained. He was their equivalent to an 18-wheeled truck driver in America. In other words, he was their badass. He wanted to arm wrestle me. I let him win the first round. They cheered him. He puffed up like a toad. It was too much for me. I took my ring off and tapped in on a table as a wager. I invited him back with a motion and grin. We gripped in force, and I slammed his hand down. There were boos and cheers. Some were laughing at him, teasing him. It was one for the Americans. He patted me on the back. Then they put me in a kitchen with an old man. There were 3 pots in the room with a chimney going up the back of the house. The channels kept the floors warm as they cooked their food. He showed me how they beat our asses. He drew a wagon wheel on the dirt floor. He showed the inner hub as us and the outer rim as the Chinese. The spokes were the bugles sounding off. And then they closed ranks as we hunkered down. It was like a noose that tightens around the neck of the condemned into decapitation. He tried to tell me how they did it, but I already knew. He had a twist of tobacco fastened on his belt. He pinched some off, put it in his pipe, and handed it to me. He was a nice old man. And then this young female Chinese officer came in to see me. She must have been high-ranking. She jerked the pipe out of my hand and kicked me on the legs. She was shaking her finger at the old man. The Chinese marched at night, in the darkness about 30 miles. If they marched during the day, the planes would see them and destroy them with napalm. I've seen a lot of that in combat. The first night with the Chinese wasn't too bad. I had walked a long way with them. However, the next night started a whole different lifestyle. I was handed off to a new group of Chinese. These Chinese appeared battle-beaten. They only grunted and pushed me around like I was a horse or a cow. There was another American prisoner. He said his name was Mac. He said that he was a doctor. That guy was shot bad. His entire side was wet and saturated with blood. He told me that he lost too much blood and was too weak to walk any further. He indicated that if I didn't carry him, he would be killed. I didn't have a choice. That night, the march went underway, with Mac on my back as his blood soaked through me. Although I was in the best shape of my life, the march was a climb. Mac and I were holding our own until we came to a mountain stream. The Chinese took off their boots, and so did I, because walking with a boot full of water would bog me down. Mac and I got across okay. We were on our way again. The Chinese rendezvoused with another Chinese unit that had 15 to 20 American prisoners. 2 of them were in bad shape. The march continued. Within 4 or 5 miles, one fell on the ground. 2 guards fell behind and later ran to catch up. Now I knew what the doc was talking about. We figured they were clubbing the stragglers over the head with a rifle butt and then stabbed in the heart with a bayonet. Life is now getting worse. Now, I'm realizing that the Chinese that we were with are picking up POWs and talking them to the rear of the POW camp. We marched nightly for miles, picking up more and more POWs. The march was draining the life out of me. I was weak and tired. To make matters worse, they rationed the food in small amounts. The food was appalling. The Chinese wouldn't even handle it themselves. It was splattered in the hands of the diseased. The prisoners. We weakened with every bite. Life continued to worsen. More prisoners were joining the march as we climbed the steep grade. The temperature fell with the rising altitude. Patches of snow and ice became part of the landscape. I had carried Mac a long way. I began to tire. I couldn't walk straight. Mac was beginning to sag on my back. I wavered and slipped on black ice. I twisted my back, and the aching pain shot through me. It was so painful that walking made it worse. The damage was permanent. A couple of troopers said they would carry Mac, for it was well understood to all of us by now that we were on a death march. The weather was becoming extremely cold. The new POWs that joined us had the wounded on a stretcher. As the grueling march continued, the guys would fall. We didn't have the resources to pick some of them up. So like always, the 2 guards stayed behind. Maybe it could be called mercy killing. Perhaps it was more humanitarian to deliver an instant death than to die a slow, cold, bitter demise. After the grade, we had accumulated scores of POWs. There were approximately 100 of us, with guards at the rear and to the sides. We finally arrived on level ground, so walking was easier. It was daylight when we entered the region ahead. The land reeked with carnage. Americans had just bombed the town. I only saw Korean civilians, broken families of mothers, fathers, husbands, wives, and children that cried in anguish over their slaughtered loved ones. In anger and despair, the Koreans threw rocks at us as we marched through their small settlement. I hope to hell I never see anything like that again. That picture will never leave my mind, not ever. As the march continued, GIs were getting sick with dysentery. One of the symptoms is diarrhea, and anyone that stepped out of formation to relieve themselves would be terminated. To stop was to die. The sick used money to wipe as long as it would last. Then they were using the Bible, the New Testament, given to them before going into combat. After that was gone, there wasn't anything left. Many of them soiled their pants and could hardly walk. As bad off as they were, believe me, they didn't want to stay behind. As dusk drew on, the weather quickly fell below zero. When the march stopped for the night, the wounded men on the stretcher were frozen to death. It was one terrible thing after another. The worst had not come yet. Pyokdong Camp 5. Night after night the march went on, and more prisoners joined the march. After marching all night, and while it was still dark, the march would stop. We would be at the edge of a village. Then I would hear a lot of Chinese talking loudly. The Koreans would be awakened to leave their houses. Then the Chinese would put the prisoners in them. Korean houses have 3 iron pots in the front of their house, with a big pot in the middle to cook food. Anyway, the Chinese would cook barley and feed us before daylight because of the air attacks. The food would be only a little in our hand. We would stay in the houses until almost dark. Then the Chinese would be talking loud, opening the doors, getting us on the march for another night. Some of the prisoners that joined us were Turks from Turkey. The Turks were doing okay, seemed strong, but the prisoners that have been on the march were getting weaker. Some would fall. Death is in the air. After many days, many have fallen, their pain had left. We are marching now in the light of day. Just in front of us was a village at the water's edge on fire, with lots of dark smoke in the air. The Americans had just bombed Pyokdong Camp 5, where they were taking us on the Yalu River. Now we were turned around and marched about 12 miles the other way. It was up a narrow canyon with a stream running through. The outhouses were over the edge of the stream. Downstream prisoners were drinking the water, and they were getting sick fast, then death quickly on its way. God, things are bad. We were taken out of the canyon and back to Camp 5. Some were frozen on the stretcher when arrived at the gate. We were kept waiting there for a long time. It was bitter cold. Then they moved us inside houses down by the water edge, 10 to a little room, close to 8 by 10. We were almost nothing but bones. We laid on the floor, lined in a row, close to each other to keep from freezing. About every 10 minutes, the man in front would move to the back wall because the man in front would catch the cold wind coming from the ice and snow. A Chinese man that spoke English told us it was 62 below zero. We lay there for days and nights until spring. The men that died, we would keep them as long as we could because that was an extra 2 spoons of crap, the boiled corn that would stick on the wall and without salt. We divided it up between us. The men had dysentery so bad their insides hung out. If one couldn't make it out in time, he would squirt over the men laying on the floor. The only good thing, it would freeze until spring. When a man died and the Chinese found out, they would let us have his clothes. Every morning the half-dead would pull the dead across the ice and leave them. It was called burial detail. One morning there was 40 dead. Unsan Korea Reflections. Shot by our own weapons. Chairman Mao Zedong, leader of Red China, went to war with King Chiang Kai-shek. America supplied King Chiang Kai-shek with thousands of Thompson submachine guns. Chiang Kai-shek lost the war to Chairman Mao. He confiscated the weapons and later used them against American forces in the Korean War, the Day of Blood. When we were in the inner hub of the massacre, it was like a turkey shoot, except it was a trooper shoot. They slaughtered us with our own sub-Thompsons. Note, I'm not sure, but our company may no longer be in existence. Once a company is annihilated, it is not reinstated. I can't substantiate that, but that is my understanding. Dougie Boy. After being in 10 major battles, awarded 2 Silver Service Stars plus other medals, and after spending 34 months in a prisoner of war, POW camp. I believe I have paid dearly for the right of free speech. Okay, now let's talk about Dougie Boy, General Douglas MacArthur. How many men do you think died for his boo-boo by the Chinese border? If you're in the service and got yourself sunburned, you could get court-martialed for destroying government property. Now, what do you think about a man in control of armies that moved his units to a mighty country's border against the direct order from the President of the United States? His commander-in-chief? He denied orders, acted on his own agenda, and men were slaughtered for his insubordination. Compared to the deaths of the many teenagers massacred, he just walked away and was relieved of duty, his personal duty. That was Dougie Boy. The feeling, when in combat, the guys get a feeling in advance if they are going to die. Once they get that feeling, you might as well take their dog tags off because they usually get killed. I was just thankful I never got the feeling. I think it is a natural sign to make things right before you die, in my opinion and experience. I have always felt I was somewhat psychic. I've always had this uncanny ability to feel if my next move was right or wrong. I remember that evening, after the pheasant flew out of the brush, I had a feeling to stay put. There was a big rock off to the right and down the side of the trail. I could have went down to the other side and crawled up inside the ledge and been safe. It was a very strong feeling to stay there, but I ignored it. I was in too big of a hurry to get home to my main forces. Shortly after that, I was captured. That night, the enemy retreated north. If I had stayed put, I could have freely walked back to the American lines. I was sorry about ignoring that feeling for years. If I had listened to my instincts, I would have avoided being captured and living the life of horror for 34 months. Copyright Bobby P. Stringer, Korean War. Captured November 1st, 1950, Unsan, Korea. This concludes the memoir of the Korean War that was written by ex-POW, Bobby P. Stringer. Compiled by Kathy Stringer. Written for his children, Kathy, Jim, Judy, and Jay Stringer. His grandchildren, Travis, Trevor, Tamra, Jenna, Scott, and Stacy. His great-grandchildren, Austin, Lee, Ashlyn, Christian, Haley, Ethan, Caitlin, Johnny, Lindsay, Tommy, Amy, Spencer, Evan, Nellie, Allie, Chance, and Eli. His great-great-grandchildren, Connor and Lavon, and their children. Thank you for listening.